So here I am, welcome. Today we're going to talk about kombucha and what is kombucha, and we're going to talk about how to make it also. I'm going to talk about the difference between wild and cultured fermentation, the benefits and uses of kombucha. There's going to be a demonstration about how to make your primary fermentation with kombucha and your secondary fermentation. And then we'll do a Q&A, so ask me anything, and most questions can revolve around kombucha, but if you want to talk about something more, feel free to ask me that also. And so this is the schedule for today. As you can see, there's a question box at the top of your page beside a question mark and some icon of some dots, and so feel free to click on that. And you can ask me live questions, and when the time is right, I will get to them, to you, and ask you that. And if you want, and if you have questions after, feel free to email me, alexis@ediblealchemy.co, and ask me any questions there, and I'll get back to you personally, so we can talk about today kombucha. And here I am. My third webinar ever, so bear with me. I'm Alexis with Edible Alchemy, and we're going to talk about kombucha today. What is kombucha, and what are people talking about kombucha? Scobie. This word might be familiar to some of you, might be totally new. A Scobie is an acronym, actually, for symbiotic, S-C, colony of bacteria, S-C-O-B-Y. And this, basically, the theory is that there was someone who had made a sweet, sugary tea and left it for some time, and it was the perfect environment for all of the bacteria and the yeasts in the air to sort of come and create this Scobie. It's a physical thing. I'll show it to you now so you have an idea what I'm talking about. So this jar I have here is basically a Scobie hotel. It's a lot. You can see a lot of layers of different Scobies in there. And I call it a Scobie hotel because there's many of them. Normally you'd have one in a jar. So Scobie, this symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, this man who left his tea somewhere saw suddenly that there was something growing on top, and it looked kind of strange. Maybe he was brave enough, he smelt it, smells vinegary, smells a little bit sweet still, and he drank it and liked the taste and realized it made him feel better. So that's a theory of maybe how it started, how it came to be, and he continued to use this symbiotic colony to inoculate other teas and ferment other teas. So that is sort of where Scobie came from. And symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, a Scobie, does not only refer to kombucha, but it also is to water kefir. You have Scobies for that. Milk kefir, you have Scobies for that. It's basically some kind of colony of bacteria and yeast that comes together. So you have kombucha Scobie, you have a vinegar Scobie, you have all of these different kinds of Scobies. And so that's kind of the difference between wild and cultured fermentation. Wild fermentation is sort of like this sort of natural thing that's happening, as last time we talked about vegetable fermentation, and we had this natural yeast on the skins of the vegetables, or fruit fermentation to make wine. You're having these natural yeasts that are on the skins of the fruits, and that's wild fermentation. It will happen spontaneously. If you crush up a bunch of things together, put them in a jar, they will naturally ferment. Normally, if I have a glass of tea and sugar sitting on the counter, it probably won't turn into kombucha unless I have this colony of bacteria and yeast already. You really have to have the perfect environment. And by having a Scobie, by having these guys, I have now the perfect environment. And once I make a sweet tea, I can inoculate that and keep it going. So the magic about bacteria and yeasts, the good ones, is that they can proliferate in the best environments. And so if you give them the right environment, you too can have this great tea. And so what are the benefits of kombucha? Why would someone think this thing is delicious? You're actually not eating the kombucha Scobie itself, but you're drinking the results. You're drinking the fermented tea. So here I have a jar of kombucha. This one is pink because I have it in hibiscus tea, and we'll talk about the different kinds of teas you can use. And this one is brown, kind of golden, because it is with the black tea, and it's the original recipe that I have sort of concocted with a group of people. That is black tea and sugar. That's the original classic recipe. But you can use all sorts of different kinds of teas, green teas, white teas, even pu'er. You can mix and match. The problem, or in the Western culture, we sometimes think teas includes chamomile and mint, but these are actually herbs. And those aren't actually teas. You can flavor your kombucha with them, but they're not actually technically teas, which we think they are. So, benefits. Probiotic, again, that's like our buzzword here is probiotic, and probiotic means pro-life. So basically these Scobies, maybe I'll just keep it here so you can see them. These Scobies are living, they're alive, and what they do is they eat sugar and they eat the tannins. They really like tannins, and tannins are those things we talked about also in the vegetable fermentation. Black tea has it. It's sort of that bitter thing. Wine has a lot of tannins, red wine. And so they love sugar source, they eat the glucose, and they like good tea. So here I have a hibiscus tea. You can try all different kinds of teas that you like. And by eating that sugar, it's creating also, again, a carbonation. So normally this is covered for transportation uses, but normally your kombucha Scobie should be breathing. It's an aerobic type of fermentation. Whereas last time when we talked about vegetable fermentation, it's anaerobic, which means no air. You shouldn't have air sort of interacting with your vegetables, otherwise you get compost. But here in this aerobic fermentation is the best to have it breathing. So it's interacting with the yeasts in the air. So I usually just have a nice cloth on top, just so my cat doesn't get in it, so bugs don't get in it, things aren't falling, and dust, and more potential for different kinds of molds to happen or something that is not good. And so it's actually quite an acidiment. When you're going through this lactic acid fermentation, it's going through these steps and turning more vinegary. And by creating that vinegary environment, you're actually creating a self-sterilizing environment again. So it's not so bad for me to go in here, have a clean hand, but it's still just my hand. And I can poke around in here. Maybe if I'm curious what it tastes like, I can put a straw in and drink it, close it back up, and it should be fine. It's not like a jar of salsa when you open your salsa and then the next 2 days you should eat it. At the third day, this is alive, this is fermented, and self-sterilizing. So here you can sort of see it's this cellulose, and I just tore a little piece off. It's not hurt by that. It will fuse again. This Scobie hotel has really lots in there, and there are actually lots fused together, multiple Scobies. Here's a nice fresh one. So the magic of these things, it's a beautiful disc. It's dyed pink from my hibiscus tea. And the magic of these guys is that it will grow and grow and grow as long as you keep feeding them. And they'll get thicker. Usually they're floating on top like this, and they get thicker and thicker as they are growing if you don't disturb them. The nice thing about this ferment is sort of like it's low maintenance compared to other ferments where you need to change their sugar all the time. It's like a baby. This one is like a really nice pet. It's really quiet. You brew your tea and your sugar and you let it sit for like a week and you let it do its thing. Whereas water kefir, which I'll talk about sometime in the future, is more high maintenance and you need to change its water all the time. I really like this one, especially for beginners that don't need, or busy people, they don't need to do so much with this ferment. And it will grow thicker and thicker, and it will grow to the container. So this one is a round container that will grow at this level wherever the air is hitting it. If I had a bathtub, I could grow a bathtub size Scobie. As long as I make a sugary tea, I could have bathtub size Scobies. And there's actually some artists that are doing this already. They're growing tons and tons of bathtubs full of kombucha Scobies. And by doing this, they're taking that Scobie, which looks like kind of a skin, right? Like I keep handling this thing. It's really like a cellulose skin. And what they do with it is they're drying it out and making leather jackets, and they're making different art pieces with it, which I'll talk about later, what you can do with these things. Because when they grow, they continue growing, and before you know it, you too will have your own Scobie hotel, and you'll have more Scobies to know, to do with than you know. And you can share them with your friends. You can do all sorts of things. I will talk about it. So just you hold on. Now, also drinking kombucha, it's a very acquired taste. Sometimes people think it tastes like an apple cider vinegar, or like an apple schorle, apple juice sort of thing. Actually, there's no apples in it, but it has that sort of tangy taste. It's sour, and there's tons of probiotics because it's taking this time to ferment. Whereas water kefir is something that ferments quite quickly. It's not actually getting as probiotic. This one is quite full. And so if you're starting to drink kombucha, if you're a beginner to this, maybe you have a lot of toxins in your body and you're going to be flushing them out when you're drinking these probiotic drinks. So it's not a good idea to take a liter of kombucha and say, hey, I'm so healthy, and you drink the whole thing right away. If you do that, you might feel your belly being really warm, and you might even get a rash. And a rash is just the sign of detoxifying too fast. Doesn't mean you're gonna die. It doesn't mean like it's gonna be there forever. That's almost the worst of the worst things that could happen to you, which is, again, means fermentation is a safe food preservation technique in general. So what I would recommend for beginners is maybe when you have your kombucha ready, take a shot glass in the morning, take a shot glass at night, and you're going to be detoxifying slowly. And as you build up your tolerance to this, then you can drink a lot more. Like for myself, I could probably drink a full liter and still feel fine. The uses, you can use this as a great thing for hangovers even. There's tons of electrolytes in there, and you're going to be replenishing yourself. For runners, for athletes, often because there is quite a strong taste in this, a strong soury taste, I would mix some of it with water and drink it after a run to replenish all those electrolytes. Often I'm looking for something more than just water. I need something with all of these other elements. Also, there's vitamin C present. There's all these vitamin Bs that come in there, which is awesome, that weren't there present before. Depending on what tea you're using, there's also the caffeine element. A lot less than a cup of tea, but it's still there. So this is also can be considered as a energy drink for some. And yeah, it's really a diverse drink, and people use it in all sorts of ways. So all of these vitamins and minerals are in there, and it's because it's acidic. Some people are scared that if they have acid reflux, it might not be for them. However, we need these acidic things to balance the pH in our digestive system. And so by actually drinking this acidic thing, you're resetting your pH internal. And it's great for that. And let's see what else. There's so many uses for this thing. So again, with the Scobie, this crazy one, they're going to be growing and they're going to be multiplying. So the main one that you have is called a mother. And that's what you'll hear often. Do you have a Scobie mother? Or I have a Scobie mother. And it will have babies. So splitting off and having more. And when you have all of these babies, you might think, oh, what can I do with them? There's too many of them. And some interesting uses that people have done in the past or have come to me and told me what they're doing with them is, one, to make a face mask. So some people who have been on antibiotics for a long time, they suddenly stop and they realize they have a lot of skin problems, and they're basically, detoxifying now because they have all of these different things in their system that they're getting rid of, and they're not able to fight with the environment around them. Having probiotics, you're able to defend yourself against sicknesses and colds and all of these things. So what this woman did was actually create a face mask with the Scobie. So she wasn't really consuming it, but she was using it for external use. And I got a call back, and she said that her acne was gone. So that is one use. You can use it for that. You can use also if you brew this too long. So say you brew it, you're going on holiday, and it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and you taste it. It's, whoa, it's so acidic, it's so vinegary. Then you can use that vinegary taste for salad dressings even. Then you have a probiotic salad, boom. You can use it for a hair rinse. A lot of people say they get really shiny hair using kombucha vinegar as a hair rinse. You can use it as a foot bath for people who have infections on their foot or warts and stuff like that. It's like using apple cider vinegar, which is a natural remedy for warts. You can use it for, yeah, like I said, art. You can make leather with it. Even these kombucha scobies, if you're growing them in circles, what you can do is put them in muffin tins and then dry them out, and they become like a little flower. And if you're planting a lot in the spring, you can use them as a decompostable flower pot. So you put your little seedlings in there, and then you put your kombucha scobies in the ground. And this is great for plants, especially the ones that love acidic environments, because then once you water them, then the SCOBY sort of comes alive and decomposes naturally in the soil. So that's really nice way to use extra SCOBYs, which you'll have a lot of them. And like I said, this thing is eating sugar, so we're starting with the sugar solution, sugar and tea, and so people are concerned about the calories and everything like that. But because of this bacteria and yeast, they're eating the sugars, and it's becoming a lot less sugary. And if you ferment it enough, there will be no sugar left. And then you'll basically have a vinegar, which you can even use to clean surfaces. It's that acidic that you can use it for cleaning. You can use it again in your salad dressings, and you can use it to inoculate your next batch. So that's the important thing, is when you're starting your own kombucha, you need to sort of keep going and use not only the SCOBY, but some of the juice from before. So let's talk about a basic start. You've got, for example, your first SCOBY, someone gives it to you, and you want to know what to do with it. To brew, then you have your SCOBY, depending on what size it is, depends on what recipe you make. Maybe you get like a really small piece, you might have to wait a little bit longer until it grows bigger and bigger until you make these enormous batches. For example, right now I have a SCOBY, and it started where I could hold it in my hands, and now it's about 60 kilo. So it's in a big vat, and I'm brewing large quantities, but it really can grow into a massive pet. It's like buying a lion cub and then realizing it is a really big creature. So what we can start off with is some tea. And so I here have some black tea. And the recipe that I would give, and you can get also online, and I will be sending it out to those who join the webinar after. Also, you can use some black tea, just a couple tablespoons per liter, and you need a sugar source. People often say no to honey because it has antibacterial properties and you're working with bacteria. However, I have used honey and I have had success. So I say never, but use an extra SCOBY perhaps if you're experimenting with different sugars that might harm your SCOBY. So here I have just some regular white cane sugar. I love using sugars that have vitamins and minerals in them because these are things that I'm going to be consuming. And so I want to use the best product that's possible. However, white sugar is totally fine. Your kombucha SCOBY will survive and will eat and enjoy white sugar. Because the calorie content, again, is going lower, so you don't have to worry too much about having all of that. You can also use like a nicer darker sugar for this one. So I have some water that I boiled. Let me show you here. So I'm just using this as a quick demonstration. So I'm doing everything kind of by eye here, but often if people want a recipe, I would say per liter, maybe here's teaspoons, I put 3, maybe 4 teaspoons in there. It depends how strong you want your tea. And let's get some hot water here, just freshly boiled. Now some people brew all of their tea like a full liter, or you can split it half and half if you're not patient enough. And you can put the boiled tea, like boil half of a strong tea, and then put cold water in it once it's ready, and you can put your SCOBY almost in immediately. So the thing is, you don't want to put your live SCOBY in with this hot water. Basically, your SCOBY is like a skin, and if you put it in hot water, it will burn it and hurt it. So I'm just steeping this tea. Now I used loose tea leaves, but you can also use tea bags if you want. That's also cleaner, then you don't have to sieve it out. And I'll put some sugar. I would say about a 1/3 cup to a 1/4 cup of sugar per liter. And yeah, it seems like a lot, but You don't need to use that much. It's up to you, your taste. But it should be a bit sweeter than you think, because all of that sugar will be digested and eaten by your SCOBY. So just make sure that the sugar is all dissolved and has an even proportion. And I'll let that steep until it's cool. Or I would add some cold water to that to make it 1 liter. So just a slew of tea. Now, in terms of teas, I'm using black tea or green tea. Teas that you might be cautious about are teas with oils in them. So people often want to say using Earl Grey or something like that. But Earl Grey actually has oils. The bergamot has oils in it. And what the oils will do is suffocate your SCOBY. It will sit on top of your SCOBY and it won't be able to breathe. So you have to remember that your SCOBY is doing an aerobic fermentation and it needs that air to breathe. Other teas with cinnamon, like chai or something like that, is also a bit dangerous because cinnamon has, again, antibacterial properties. If you want to add these flavors after, do it in the secondary fermentation when your SCOBY's been removed. So now, ta-da! I have tea, and it's cooled down to the right temperature. I know that it is because if I put my finger in it for 10 seconds, my finger wouldn't burn. And if you put your finger in it and it burns before 10 seconds, it's basically the same thing you're going to do to your SCOBY. So this is about 1 liter and a third or so. But let's say it's about 1 liter. And I've acquired one of these Scobies. So basically, after this is a sugar tea solution. And what I would do is take my SCOBY of my choice. Even this small one would work just fine. But maybe I want to give it a generous start and put a lot of bacteria. I got a really big one here. All right. Ding. Beautiful. So sometimes it sinks and sometimes it floats. So people are often really worried. Let's see what this one does. Maybe right now it's sinking to the bottom, and in a couple hours it might be at the top. We will see. We don't know. And it's not a bad thing. It does its own thing. If it stays at the bottom, a new one will grow just at the top here. So what's growing, it might take a couple weeks or just a couple days, and you'll start seeing a film. And then a couple more days, you'll start seeing it less and less translucent. So we can't leave it just like this. This SCOBY is going to be working too hard to transform this tea. It needs a kickstart. And what I would do then is add the juice, some of the juice from the last ferment. So maybe about a 4th cup or more, whatever you have, and it'll give it a kickstart. There, he's already happy. If you don't have any juice and you're just given the kombucha SCOBY, you can actually use like a vinegar, even a household vinegar, just to give it that acidic environment. Or you could use apple cider vinegar also, but I would just, try to keep it with your kombucha SCOBY juice from the last batch. Now I'm putting this cloth on top so it can breathe, and I'll put it somewhere to ferment. And I recommend tasting it every day. Taste it because it changes. So once you find your taste, if you like it sweeter, maybe try it in 5 days or 4 days. If you like it really sweet, if you like it more sour, try it. Keep trying it and find your flavor. Once you found your flavor, then transfer it into different bottles. I often take out my SCOBY and some of the juice and make a batch right away, or you can keep it in storage in something like I have here with a cloth over it. And you can leave it for months and months and months, actually, as long as it has food. I had one, I went away for 3 months and I came back and my SCOBY was this thick, but it was still alive. The juice is very vinegary. I wouldn't drink it, but I used it for the next batch. So it's totally cool to leave it. I don't put it in the fridge. I let it keep fermenting. This is one that doesn't actually need the fridge unless you want to bottle it and make it cool and enjoy it. So what I would do then is get a bottle once I found my taste and transfer it into the bottle and refrigerate it. This is when secondary fermentation comes because there's still some sugars present. And once you cap it, there's going to be carbonation that builds. So here I have one that I bottled some days ago, and it has just even these bubbles at the top. And I can see that there's some pressure building because the cap is really tight right now. So I'm always cautious, again, in glass bottles, just like the ginger bug, that there's pressure building up and there's potential that it could explode. So I'm always watching the cap on these kinds of things. So let's hear it. Let's hear it. It's great. And I can see there's little bubbles rising. I don't know how great the camera is, but there's little bubbles rising. It's totally alive. It's really happy. So what's happened now is that the sugar left in the kombucha was sitting there, and it was continuing to ferment, and it built up this pressure on there. And that's just the normal flavor of black tea and sugar, and that's already a secondary ferment. If you want to become a bit more inventive, you can add different flavors. This is maybe where you want to add an Earl Grey syrup, or those chamomile or mint tea leaves that we were talking about. Or for me, here I have some ginger, and I would love to add some ginger. So again, just show you can add a ginger syrup if you want, or I like adding fresh ginger. And just like we had in the ginger webinar, the ginger bug, there's natural yeasts on this skin, so it's actually going to help eat the extra sugars that are left in my kombucha tea. So big chunks, you're not going to be eating them necessarily, but they're there. So I'll just put them in my bottle, like that. And let's say I want a new flavor. I have here that I had made. This can be really inventive. You can use flavors like jams. They have sugars in it. You can use fresh fruit. And here I just have like a puree of strawberry and peach. And I got all these strawberries and peaches, and there's natural sugars in there. No added sugar, but I would love a strawberry, peach, kombucha, and ginger. So I'll add some with my handy funnel. And it's really up to you how much you want to add. This is really just an inventive way. Looks great. So strawberry, peach, ginger, kombucha. And now these sugars and the fruit and the yeasts on the ginger and the extra sugars from the kombucha will all react. So here I'm even using my kombucha that I already prepared. Because it's still alive, it'll still work. Strawberry, peach, ginger. All right, don't overflow. So you can already see it's quite happy. It's really fizzing there. Beautiful. And now I really want this carbonation to build. I want a really flavorful tea. So I'm going to leave it on the counter for maybe 1 or 2 days and then put it in the fridge and keep enjoying it. The magic about these things is that the cap will keep popping. It'll keep, like every day, 5 million times you can open it and go, whoosh, and it will open and close like that. Not like Coca-Cola where it goes flat. So let's see. Now, like I mentioned, the creative uses and the primary and secondary fermentation. I invite you to start asking questions, and I will answer your questions as they come. So get your fingers ready, and you can go ahead, and I'll keep blabbering on as you're asking questions. And so we also have these rose hips, or rose leaves, sorry, that you can also add to them, things like that. If you want to ask questions, if you don't know what I'm talking about to ask questions, go to the top of your page, and there's a question mark, and beside that question mark, there's a triple dot thing, and you can press on that, and there's a Q&A. So click on that, and then start asking me whatever you want to ask me about kombucha, and I'll get to your questions. So we already have a couple here. Let me see. Is just some liquid from some kombucha enough to start the batch without a SCOBY? So this is a totally valid question. Yes, I think just some. It depends how strong or probiotic that liquid is. So there's also this GT kombucha brand, and I have a lot of friends who have started their own SCOBY just by buying this kombucha in the store. So it's like an industrial kombucha, and you can buy it, and you can actually just put it in another container with a cover on top so it can breathe, and it will symbiotically start making its own SCOBY on top. It might take a little bit of time because it's not very strong. It doesn't have a SCOBY present to start it. But yes, if you have like the active live kombucha, then you can definitely start your own kombucha SCOBY with that. So the problem with store-bought ones, store-bought kombuchas in general, is often the probiotics have been taken out. And this is so they have a longer shelf life. And they can't legally sell them as really probiotic because they aren't, again. But there are still some companies that do have them. They just have to be careful because alcohol will accumulate. And then they're not legally allowed to sell them as a non-alcoholic drink. Kombucha often has a very, very little amount of alcohol in it, about 0.5%. But after you seal it, something like this, and if I wait long enough, yeah, it could definitely get up to 1%, maybe 1.5 or so. So for mothers who are pregnant or people who are sensitive to alcohol, just be aware that alcohol is able to accumulate, but also a very small amount. Same thing with the pressure. So let's see, another question here. Do you ever make a savory flavored second ferment? Yes, this is a really cool question. So savory flavored is really good. I have done a celery one where you take the celery leaves, which actually have a ton of flavor, and you can do either primary or secondary ferment with these ones. And the result that you get, you can use it in a Bloody Mary or something like that. Secondary ferments, because it's a sour tonic in a way, you can add alcohol to it and have sort of this probiotic, sexy cocktail in a way. And you can add cumin to it, like cumin seeds, and make it savory in that way. Even adding just a little bit of salt or something it fits your taste. Definitely try it out. The sea salt is the best because it has those minerals in it. So yeah, I totally encourage savory ferments also, not only sweet, and it goes well hand in hand, sort of that salty sweet in there. Yeah. We have another question. Okay, I don't like fizzy drinks. Is there any way to make it without bubbles? Yes. So the only way that bubbles are going to accumulate is if you cap it. So if you have it open, the bubbles are just going to evaporate. So right now, the one that I have here is fermenting, but actually not a lot of carbonation can come because all of the bubbles are evaporating. And so I could drink it straight out of here, which is actually what I did for the first year or so when I had kombucha. I was just drinking it straight from here every day, taking some out and tasting the changes as the days went on. But once you want to sort of have those bubbles accumulate, then you would cap it. So hope that answers. Another question. If a Scobie, starting a Scobie from scratch using a raw kombucha, would I make black tea sugar and add the original kombucha to it? So to start, let's see, I'm trying to understand. So you could add you can't really start your Scobie from scratch, and maybe you can, but you have to have that perfect environment of bacteria and yeast. The best thing to do is to find that kombucha Scobie from someone. And so basically, if you want to start a new batch, the best way to do it, or the easiest or safest way, is just sugar and tea, and then add, yeah, that original Scobie. So like my original Scobie mother, I have one, it's what, 5 years old, and it's made 1 million babies at this point, and I've given them and sold them to other people, and they have Scobies, and so they have 1 million babies. And so I don't know anymore who is their original mother, but once you have one, you can add it. Like this one, I have a Scobie Hotel, and I'm just adding one. But if you have 2, you can add both of those to your next batch. And if you have 4, then you can add all of those to your next batch. Just remember that the more Scobie you have, the more probiotic thing, Scobie, you have, is going to be eating the sugar faster. So the bigger one I put will make it ferment faster. If I put just a little one, it might take more days. Same thing with the temperature. The warmer the temperature, the faster it will go, and it's optimal around 24 to 30 degrees Celsius. That's optimal. So another question was, can you use any tea, black tea, green tea, Earl Grey? Like I said, that Earl Grey, because of the oils, I would be wary of the oils sitting on top of your Scobie and suffocating it. So yeah, any other questions, feel free to shoot my way. I'll give you a couple minutes. Can you blab on? Some interesting flavors that I've made in the past were with lavender. That's a really popular one if people like floral sorts of tastes, lavender rose, or lemongrass is also really nice. And these ones you can actually make sort of a syrup and add them to the secondary fermentation. And you can make, yeah, a million different combinations. Turns out really nice, and the flavor is always changing. So if you like that taste, if you like that sour, vinegary taste, maybe it's for you. But also beware that it's very probiotic. It's one of the most biggest health elixirs. So they sometimes call it the tea of life or magic tea. Often a big mistake is people call it a mushroom. Here in Germany, they always call it Kombucha Pilz, which means kombucha mushroom. And it's actually not a fungus, it's a bacteria and yeast, a combination. So you don't actually need to worry about spores or anything like that. It's just this colony of bacteria and yeast. That's a mixed perception of calling it a mushroom. It looks like one, it looks like a bunch of weird mushrooms in a jar, but it's not actually. Also, one comment about mold, if you have any kinds of mold growing on it, something fuzzy or weird, then that is a sign that something wrong has happened. Maybe some bad bacteria got in there. Maybe you didn't have an acidic enough environment. You didn't add enough the juice to the last one, and the bad molds were able to take over before the good bacteria were able to create their own environment. If it molds, I do encourage you to throw away your SCOBY. Hopefully at this point you have more and that you can use one of the other many SCOBYs that you have to make more tea. The problem is if you have mold on it, there's potential that it's aspergillus, and this is like really dangerous mold to have on your SCOBY. That's the only kind of potential, but it shouldn't be too dangerous. I have a question here. Any thoughts on coconut sugar? I have used coconut sugar and it was successful and it tasted really nice. And again, there's lots of vitamins and minerals in this sugar, so totally great for you to have after, because those vitamins and minerals are only multiplied. And yeah, I've had good success. It also gives it a nice dark, creamy, caramelly flavor. So I'll try that one. Another question. What if I'm gone during the week and don't have time to burp the kombucha? Should I put it in the fridge? How can I avoid explosions if I'm gone during the week? So yeah, let's say that I have this one that I just made now and I'm gone for an entire week. I actually have no idea how fast this is going to ferment. I know I put ginger in it and I know there's a lot of yeasts on it, so it could be dangerous that way because there's a lot of carbonation that's possible to build up. But I would probably just put it in the fridge, and if I'm really worried, if I really think there's going to be tons of carbonation growing in there, I would put it in a plastic food safe bottle, and then it's able to expand to a point that the bottle is just going to get really tight. If it gets really tight, the bottom will pop out, but it's not going to explode. When glass bottles like this explode, often it's in many shrapnels, and that's the only real dangerous part about fermentation. Again, I'll say it always, it's one of the safest ways to ferment your food, so to preserve your food. Let's see, we got another question. Do you need to use a heat pad? No, not necessarily. Like, it depends how cold your room is. Like, I'm from Canada, and it could be quite cold in your apartments if you don't turn the heat on. And so the colder it is, the slower it ferments. If I have it in the fridge, it's really it's going to take weeks and weeks to get a really sour taste. But if it's warm, wow, it's going to work a lot faster. So in the summer, it's been really hot, and I've noticed to get the flavor I want, it takes only 7 days with my 60-pound SCOBY. And I'm having to add a lot more sugar than in the winter. In the winter, I add a lot less, and I'm getting the same results, but also a longer time. It's taking a lot longer to ferment. It's kind of like us in the winter when we're cold. We stay inside. We don't do as much. We're not as active. So you can really think of it like a pet in a way. So let's see. Do SCOBYs always have to be covered in liquid? Yes, if you have a SCOBY out, if I just leave it out on the counter, yeah, then it's in an environment that there's potential for bad bacteria to come on it. It's going to start drying out, and it's not going to sort of create that liquid on it. So if you're going away on holiday, I would encourage you to brew a new tea, a fresh tea with sugar, and have enough that when the SCOBY is eating it and it's growing bigger and bigger and bigger, that it won't self-digest. So one friend of mine grew a SCOBY and it was growing bigger and bigger and bigger until it actually filled the entire jar and there was no liquid left, and it was still possible to use it until he didn't use it anymore and it started to self-digest, like it started eating itself basically, and at that point it wasn't usable anymore. So definitely required to have it surrounded in a liquid environment. That's the environment that they like. Let's see, someone says they're having problem creating carbonation during 2 Fahrenheit. So I added ginger and strawberries, filled to the top with a bottle and capped, but no fizz. Any thoughts? So during 2, oh, secondary fermentation, I got it. So maybe you didn't have enough yeasts in there. Maybe you need to, yeah, like I would say, even try shaking it. Sometimes they like to be shaked. Maybe you can open it up again and let the natural yeasts in the air come and sort of help it out for some days and then close it up again. That might help. Sometimes it's working really well and sometimes it doesn't. This is the thing about fermentation, is that it's always different and you're always getting different results. And even some cultures say according to the moon cycles. And like, I know that's getting very extreme, but this is a cultural thing too. And where people would only do their ferments to a specific recipe during a specific moon cycle and in specific seasons. So they can get very, very specific, but even then, you're always getting different results. So maybe this time it's not fermenting. I definitely encourage you try again. Maybe your strawberries, they didn't have any yeasts, or like maybe they're irradiated, I'm not sure. But if you're adding natural fruits in there, often they have those natural yeasts on them also, and they're helping out. Try adding dehydrated fruit like a date or a fig or some raisins. Again, there's these natural yeasts and it can help the carbonation process. And also having that raisin in there, it will sink at first and then it will start floating when there's carbonation. And if you're having it in a glass bottle, it's a great carbonation detector. You see, my raisin is floating now. Now I know it's carbonated. If the lid doesn't tell me enough, now I know it's carbonated. So I can even see the one that I've used now. There's lots of bubbles. The seeds of the strawberries are already floating. The ginger's already all at the top. There's still some at the bottom, but it's going up and down. Like it's looking good. So any other questions before I head out for today? Feel free to shoot them my way. Please go to ediblealchemy.co and see what's going on there. The website is growing and building. Always looking for your feedback. So feel free to also send me a personal email at alexis.ediblealchemy.co if you have recommendations. These webinars are sort of trying to figure out what your feedback is and to improve the next coming courses. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining me today with kombucha. So send me more questions. That's all for today. Ciao.